Fetty Wap went from being one of the hottest artists in the world with great hits, money, fame, and that superstar lifestyle to serving time in prison because of the poor decisions he made at the peak of his career. In this video, we'll be talking about how Fetty Wap's life fell apart. Fetty Wap was born Willie Jr. Maxwell II on June 7, 1991 in Paterson, New Jersey. Unfortunately for Fetty, he was born with congenital glaucoma, a serious eye condition that increased the pressure in his left eye unnaturally, and because doctors couldn't save it, he ended up wearing a prosthetic from a young age.
I learned something new. I was born with glaucoma, and I lost the eye at 6 months. And I got reconstructive surgery when I was 12. Okay. And I just stopped wearing the prosthesis because I didn't want to look like everybody else.
Okay. Nevertheless, he never treated that as something that would limit him because in fact, it became part of his identity. However, music wasn't always the master plan. As a teenager, he was more focused on daily survival and life. But around 2013 to 2014, he started recording seriously, releasing a song called Trap Queen, which instantly put him on the map. She my trap queen, let her hit the bando. At first, it built momentum quietly online, gaining a couple of thousand listeners. But as weeks passed, Trap Queen started picking up real traction on SoundCloud and local radio, and before long, it was everywhere. By 2015, the song had exploded nationwide, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and staying on the chart for an impressive 52 weeks. That wasn't a small achievement, or as one commenter put it, Fetty Wap had the world in his palms when this dropped. He was now competing with the biggest artists in the world, and to make it even better, the music video racked up over 900 million views and 5.7 million likes, pushing him into the global spotlight. And because of that success, major labels started calling. In November 2014, Fetty signed a deal with 300 Entertainment, an imprint of Atlantic Records. The deal gave him distribution power, marketing muscle, and most importantly, guaranteed national visibility. And from that moment on, the momentum didn't slow down because in 2015, Fetty dropped his self-titled debut album Fetty Wap. Now here's where things really took off because the album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, once again placing him among the top names in hip-hop. However, it wasn't just one song carrying him. Fetty followed up with 679 and My Way, both of which charted in the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100. He got so big that even Drake remixed My Way and created the version that was then played on radio. Because of that, he became one of the rare artists to have multiple top hits from a debut project in the same year. Nevertheless, the recognition didn't stop at charts because Fetty earned a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Performance. Now, for someone who had just broken into the mainstream and competing with legendary artists like Lil Wayne and Eminem, that was huge validation. On top of that, he won awards at the iHeartRadio Music Awards and the Billboard Music Awards in 2016, wins that confirmed that his popularity was beyond just hype, and this translated into industry respect. Yet what made him stand out was his melodic style. He blended singing and rapping in a way that felt emotional but still catchy. That sound influenced the direction of mid-2010s hip-hop, and luckily for him, fans connected with it fast. Or as one Reddit user put it, "Man, being in college when Fetty was poppin' was crazy. Every party had every Fetty hit playing. I remember I had a party at my apartment and some big-ass Greek dude asked if I could play RGF Island and I said, hell yeah, brother." But despite the celebrity glamour, selling out shows, collaborating with some of the biggest names in the industry, and becoming hip-hop's hottest artist, not everything would remain as perfect as it seemed at the time because his chart presence slowly began to fade. Even after dropping other singles like Jimmy Choo, they simply didn't come close to matching the massive commercial success that he saw during his breakout year. But to make matters worse, Fetty had a problem of overspending, a problem that almost all multimillionaire rappers have. By 2017, he was spending around $150,000 per month on cars, jewelry, and multiple apartments.
I was doing like $150,000 a month bills, but that's the dumbest shit I was doing. Like, matter of fact, yeah, if I had to, it was jewelry and like apartments. I had a lot of fucking apartments.
And when he wasn't spending money on himself, he was supporting a large entourage whose expenses were also on his tab.
I was traveling with 14, 15 niggas, 16 niggas, maybe sometimes 30 niggas. And
y'all know. So if you buying shit for yourself, you gonna look like just a greedy ass, selfish ass nigga.
So then the type of nigga I am, I'm like, all right, everybody grab a pair.
Now, when income is flowing, $150K a month looks manageable. But when hit records slow down, those expenses become unsustainable. And for a guy who had no money management skills at the time, poor financial decisions stacked up quickly. And before long, he found himself going broke for nearly 6 months. And to make matters worse, around that same period, tension was building behind the scenes. Fetty began having disputes with RGF Productions, claiming he wasn't receiving the royalties he believed he was owed.
before I got on, you know, they was telling me like, you know, every platinum record, every time you go platinum, they said you get $1 million. You feel what I'm saying? So we went platinum in 4 weeks. You feel me? So, you know, I'm like, where that check at? Like, you know?
But the worst blow came in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic shut down touring worldwide. For artists like Fetty, live shows were a major source of income, and without touring, revenue dropped sharply. Now, combine reduced income with high spending and unresolved business disputes, and the financial strain becomes obvious. And at this stage, the damage was building quietly. By 2021, Fetty was still performing, still making appearances, and still booked for major festivals. However, behind the scenes, federal investigators had been watching for months. And on October 28, 2021, Fetty was arrested at Citi Field in Queens, New York, just before he was scheduled to perform at the Rolling Loud Music Festival.
Well, now to a developing story. Rapper Fetty Wap under arrest on federal drug charges.
He was taken into custody last night at Citi Field.
Fans were gathering for the show and the stage was set, but instead of walking to perform, he was taken into federal custody. Now here's where things become extremely serious. Federal prosecutors unsealed an indictment charging him along with 5 other men with conspiracy to distribute and possess illegal narcotics. In addition to the charge, the 5 other defendants were also initially charged with firearms related to the alleged drug trafficking. According to the official press release, the case involved more than 100 kilograms of controlled substances. Those are not small amounts, because the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District in New York described him as a kilogram-level redistributor, meaning he played a significant role in moving large quantities of narcotics. On top of that, authorities stated that the alleged drug trafficking ring operated across state lines, transporting narcotics from the West Coast to Long Island and New Jersey. But what made the case interesting was the fact that these substances were allegedly shipped right below everyone's noses.
It is alleged he was mailing narcotics to the U.S. Post Office and then using drivers with hidden vehicle compartments to transport mass quantities of cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl across the country.
Yet when news of the arrest broke, people were shocked, reacting through comments like, "Rappers are prime candidates for drug trafficking due to the fact that they travel often and hardly are stopped. I guess some rappers never leave the street life alone. And, honestly, the money is what does it. When you have untaxed money, it's hard to let go, especially when you go all over the country." However, these were all allegations, and federal cases are not built overnight. These types of indictments usually follow months of investigation, surveillance, and evidence gathering. But despite the severity of the charges, Fetty was not immediately sent to prison. And on November 5, 2021, he was released on a $500,000 bond. Although he was granted conditional freedom, he was required to surrender his passport, remain under home confinement, wear an electronic monitoring device, and submit to random substance tests. Yet what's even more interesting is that federal prosecutors allege that the conspiracy operated between June 2019 and June 2020, a timeline that overlaps with the pandemic period when touring income had slowed down. Perhaps this was just another side hustle for Fetty. Nevertheless, those were allegations presented by the prosecution, and the case would continue moving through the federal court system. Unfortunately for Fetty, being charged in federal court carried a high conviction rate compared to state-level cases because federal investigations are often built carefully before an arrest is made. Now, while the legal process was still ongoing at that point, the damage to his public image was immediate. Festival bookings slowed, public perception shifted, and the headlines no longer talked about chart success or comeback potential. Instead, they focused on indictments, substance quantities, and conspiracy charges. Nevertheless, at that moment in late 2021, his story was not yet fully written because he was released on bond, meaning that he still had the opportunity to fight the charges in court. However, the situation was far more serious than anything he had faced before, because unfortunately, this arrest would only mark the beginning of a much deeper legal battle that would ultimately change his life permanently. Because while Fetty was out on bond and awaiting trial, he was not supposed to commit any new crimes and was supposed to avoid behavior that could be seen as threatening or illegal. But in August 2022, federal prosecutors moved to revoke his bond after doing the unthinkable in one of his social media accounts.
The rapper Fetty Wap was arrested in New Jersey for allegedly threatening to kill somebody over FaceTime. The 31-year-old is accused of calling someone on FaceTime back in December, showing a firearm and threatening their life. Today, the judge revoked his $500,000 bail, saying he violated conditions of his release following his arrest at Citi Field in October of 2021.
After hearing this news, some fans were outraged. One commented, "If he just threatened some other thug, who cares? They should be more concerned with the rampant crime going on against some random law-abiding citizens. They needed this headline to appear like they're actually doing something to protect the public." However, some believe that he deserved it, or as one put it, "Of course he did, and he meant it. These fools ain't nothing but glorified gangsters, all waste, poison to society." Nevertheless, this wasn't the end of legal developments. In fact, it marked the beginning of something worse, because just 2 weeks later, on August 22, 2022, Fetty pleaded guilty in federal court to one count of conspiracy to distribute drugs.
Fetty Wap pleaded guilty to conspiring to distribute over 500 grams of cocaine.
The plea was significant because it meant that he formally admitted his role in the substance trafficking operation, and by doing so, he avoided the risk of being convicted on additional counts that could have resulted in even longer prison time. Now, when someone pleads guilty in federal court, they usually acknowledge the facts laid out by prosecutors as part of the agreement. In that case, court documents said Fetty admitted to participating in the distribution network between 2019 and 2020. Unfortunately, that admission closed the door on fighting the charge at trial and got some people thinking that he was truly and was always a dealer. One commenter said, "This is the kind of situation that really shouldn't be surprising at all. Just because these street dudes made a few rap hits and some money doesn't change who they are. It's as simple as that good old saying. You can take the man out of the streets, but you can't take the streets out of the man." Some even believe that this was the end of Fetty, or as another one put it, "This concludes another episode of When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong." Bobby Shmurda got locked up while he was at his peak. He did about 7, and right now his career being sustainable is questionable at best. Fetty Wap, who with his one-of-a-kind style was on fire and nationwide in 2015 and had cosigns throughout the industry. He has not been relevant for about 5 years and is now just getting locked up. A 5-year sentence right now effectively ends his career. For Fetty, this moment represented more than just a legal formality, because it marked the collapse of the last piece of his freedom. And unfortunately for him, public perception shifted again. See, the arrest in 2021 shocked people. His bond getting revoked in August 2022 raised eyebrows, but the guilty plea confirmed the seriousness of the case, and as expected, headlines no longer framed it as alleged. They now reported that he had admitted involvement. Yet, as much as they framed him as this kingpin, it's important to separate emotion from fact, because the guilty plea was a legal decision. It may have been influenced by legal advice, evidence strength, and sentencing strategy. However, the impact on his career was undeniable. The superstar who once debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 was officially a convicted federal offender awaiting sentencing. The same artist who performed on festival stages, dripped out in expensive branded clothing, was now in a detention facility, dressed in inmate clothing, waiting for a judge's final word. Perhaps this should have been a lesson for other rappers still contemplating the illegal business. Or as one guy put it, "He spent all his money on stupid shit. This guy had platinum hits. Rappers need to learn from this guy." Regardless, after the guilty plea, everything slowed down as the case moved into the sentencing phase, which in federal court is one of the most serious stages. This is when the judge reviews the crime, the defendant's background, and the federal sentencing guidelines before deciding how many years someone will serve. Unfortunately for Fetty, that decision finally came on May 24th, 2023.
Rapper Fetty Wap has been sentenced to 6 years in prison. His sentence is for his role in a drug trafficking conspiracy that took place in parts of Long Island and New Jersey.
In an attempt to retain what was left of his image, Fetty apologized in the courtroom, saying, "Me being selfish and my pride put me in this position today. I hurt my community, people who look up to me, my family, and myself. I'm truly sorry for any pain I caused." But that did not win Judge Joanna's sympathy, because while announcing Fetty's sentence, she said, "Despite your background and all you overcame, you threw it all away." Some also argued that Fetty had found himself in this situation, saying, "Because people like him come into a bunch of money and start living the glamour life. Then he was unable to capitalize on his earlier success and he was broke, so selling mass quantities of cocaine was another way to make millions." And so, in addition to the prison term, Fetty was also sentenced to 5 years of supervised release after he completes his incarceration. That means once he leaves prison, he won't just be fully free, as he would be under court supervision, required to follow strict rules, report to a probation officer, and avoid further legal trouble. Yet what shocked many was when his defense team tried to provide context. Specifically speaking, his lawyers argued that financial hardship during the COVID-19 pandemic played a role in his decision-making. Turns out, because the pandemic shut down concerts and touring worldwide, it was so hard for artists, because touring is often a primary source of income. But despite this reason, prosecutors commentators pushed back strongly, as they emphasized that Fetty had used his name to glamorize the drug trade among young fans, and so to them, Fetty deserved a longer sentence. To support their argument, they argued that the artist became famous for singing about his experience cooking substances and selling them, particularly pointing out that the Trap Queen video depicted young children behind him as he idealized selling substances. However, sentencing ultimately rests with the judge, who weighs both sides carefully, and so after the 6-year sentence, some actually believe that Fetty had dodged a longer sentence, whereas one argued, nobody's talking about the life sentence if he didn't take the plea. That would have been disastrous. If it was me, I would have taken the plea as well real quick. Life sentences are nothing to joke about. Hopefully, he stays out of trouble because next time, he might not be so lucky. 6 years is not bad. That's 3.5 years with good behavior. But unfortunately, once the sentence was official, reality became inevitable. The former chart-topping artist was now a federal inmate, designed to serve his sentence at FCI Sandstone, a low-security federal correctional institution in Minnesota. As a low-security facility, it houses inmates convicted of non-violent offenses and those considered lower risk compared to high-security penitentiaries. And although low-security facilities often provide access to educational programs and work assignments, none of that changes the fact that his career momentum came to a sudden stop. He could not tour, he could not freely record in professional studios, and could not promote himself the way artists normally do. On top of that, incarceration also reshaped his public image, because some fans remained loyal while others moved on quickly in an industry that constantly looks for the next new sound. Regardless, it didn't change the fact that people still felt he deserved everything that came to him, and that people feeling sympathy for him was insane. One commenter argued, "You want to spread 100 kilos of lethal drugs like fentanyl across Long Island and other communities? What do you expect? People are complaining that he got convicted just because they like his music. Crazy." But prison sentences do not always play out exactly the way they are first announced, because while Fetty was originally sentenced to 6 years in May 2023, federal law allows certain inmates to earn time credits for good behavior and participation programs. Specifically speaking, the First Step Act, passed in 2018, allows certain federal inmates to earn time credits by completing approved programs like job training, educational courses, drug treatment, or behavioral therapy. For every 30 days they successfully participate in qualifying programs, they can earn 10 to 15 days off their sentence. And although the credits don't usually erase the sentence entirely, they can move someone into supervised release or home confinement earlier than their original release date. Fortunately for Fetty, those credits mattered, because on January 7th, 2026, after serving just over 3 years of his 6-year sentence, Fetty was transferred to home confinement.
And rapper Fetty Wap has been released early from federal prison. In 2023, he was sentenced to 6 years for conspiring to distribute cocaine, but he was moved out of the Sandstone, Minnesota prison Wednesday. Officials say Wap is now under home confinement.
This gave him an opportunity to appreciate his friends and family, saying, "I want to thank my family, friends, and fans for the love, prayers, and continued support. It truly means everything to me. Right now, my focus is on giving back through my community initiatives and foundation, supporting at-risk young children by expanding access to education, early tech skills, and vision care for young kids and students so they can show up as their best selves." Now, home confinement does not mean full freedom, but it does mean that he was allowed to serve the remainder of his custodial sentence outside of a prison facility under strict monitoring, and for the first time in a while, he could finally breathe some air outside prison. And while the release didn't erase his sentence, it signaled the beginning of re-entry, transitioning from incarceration back into society. Now, his official projected release date from federal supervision is November 8th, 2026. That date reflects the end of his custodial responsibility. However, even after that date, his 5-year supervised release term ordered at sentencing continues under court oversight. And although supervised release allows someone to rebuild their life outside prison walls, it comes with serious rules. Specifically speaking, during this period, Fetty is prohibited from consuming alcohol or illegal substances unless prescribed by a doctor. On top of that, he must submit to mandatory drug testing. He cannot open new bank accounts without approval from his probation officer, and he must provide full disclosure of income, financial records, and tax filings. Nevertheless, these requirements are standard for federal substance conspiracy cases and are designed to monitor financial and personal stability. So even though he's not inside a prison cell, he has not yet regained his full freedom, and judging by his past willingness to violate probation, fans can only wonder if he'll survive living outside with all the rules limiting what he can and cannot do.